Stop. Listen. Pay attention. Chosen one. This is not a motivational pause or a dramatic opening. This is a direct interruption because something in your life reached a threshold, and ignoring it would blur what you already sense. There is urgency here, but not alarm. The kind that steadies you rather than shakes you. You have been carrying a quiet fatigue that sleep does not fully resolve. Not exhaustion in the obvious sense, but a dull pressure that lingers even on calm days. You have felt it in your focus, drifting in moments where you paused longer than usual before responding in a subtle sense of being alone, even when surrounded by people. Nothing catastrophic, nothing you could easily explain. Just enough to make you wonder if something was off. There has also been confusion not about who you are, but about why certain things slowed down without collapsing. Plans stalled. Conversations lost momentum. Outcomes delayed without explanation. And yet you remained functional. You showed up. You handled responsibilities. You did not unravel. That contrast is important. This message is not here to diagnose you or assign meaning prematurely. It is here to give you clarity without overwhelming you. To explain what that pressure was without turning it into a spectacle. To name something you already felt without exaggerating it. You may have questioned whether you were doing something wrong by not forcing answers or pushing harder. You may have wondered if waiting was avoidance. It was not. The stillness you chose was not passive. It was stabilizing. And what stabilized you also neutralized what could not sustain itself around you. This is intentional. Not because of destiny language or dramatic labeling, but because timing matters. You are hearing this now because the phase you moved through has ended. Not loudly, not ceremonially, quietly. The evidence is in what did not happen. You did not break, you did not react, you did not feed the pressure, but what follows will make sense of that. Not all at once, not with conclusions handed to you, but with enough structure that you can see your own experience clearly without distortion or self-doubt. This message is personal because it aligns precisely with what you lived, not with what you feared. And as you continue listening, you will recognize that nothing here is being added to you. Something is being named. Stay with it. This is where uncertainty is removed. This message is not meant for people who are searching for an identity, a role, or a label to step into. It is meant for you because something already happened in your life, and you were the one who carried it without announcing it. You did not imagine the shift. You were involved in it directly. When you are the intended recipient of something like this, there is no rush of emotion. There is recognition, a quiet internal alignment. You do not feel flattered or elevated. You feel seen. That response is not common, and it is not learned. The term chosen one is not being used to separate you from others or place you above anyone. It is being used to describe a function you already demonstrated. You are someone whose internal system does not escalate under pressure. You do not need to brace yourself consciously when tension increases. You absorb it, regulate it, and continue operating. What occurred around you recently did not require your reaction to be real. It required your presence. And you stayed present. You did not overcorrect. You did not collapse into analysis. You did not externalize discomfort. That alone changed the outcome. Many people struggle visibly because they rely on conscious effort to stay upright. You did not struggle because your stability operates beneath awareness. You were not resisting. You were not fighting. You were not trying to be strong. You simply did not destabilize. This is an important distinction. Conscious strength is loud. It announces itself. It gets tired. Unconscious stability is quiet. It does not argue with pressure. It lets time do the filtering. What you experienced was not something you had to overcome. It was something that lost momentum because it could not attach to you. The waiting was not indecision. It was non-engagement. You did not feed what was trying to provoke response urgency or emotional leakage. This is why what happened involved you directly, even though it looked uneventful on the surface. You were the fixed point in a situation that required volatility to survive. When volatility did not appear, the situation resolved itself. This is not an identity you activate later. It is not a title you earn. It is a description of how you already function when conditions test coherence. You do not need to amplify yourself. You do not need to prove awareness. You do not need to react to validate experience. Your presence alone is the mechanism. Now that this has been clarified, the sensations you felt can be examined without confusion. And they will make sense when seen for what they were. The dominant symptom you noticed was not dramatic. It was subtle enough to doubt, but persistent enough to register. A low-level fatigue that did not match your actual workload. A mental heaviness that came and went without a clear cause. Moments where your body felt fine, but your energy felt occupied. You may have labeled this as burnout stress or distraction. You may have questioned your discipline, your motivation, or your focus. That interpretation makes sense in a culture that treats every internal shift as a problem to be solved. But what you experienced was not a flaw. It was a signal. This kind of fatigue does not come from overexertion. It comes from containment. From holding steady while something presses against your internal structure, testing whether it can create reaction leakage or imbalance. Your system responded by conserving energy, not by collapsing. That is why rest did not immediately fix it. Sleep helped, but it did not reset it. Breaks gave relief, but not resolution. Because the source was not physical depletion, it was regulation under pressure. There was also a narrowing of emotional range. Not numbness, but selectivity. You were less reactive, less pulled into unnecessary conversations, less inclined to explain yourself. This may have felt like withdrawal or disengagement, but it was neither. It was your system reducing bandwidth to remain coherent. You did not lose clarity. You delayed expression. You did not lose motivation. You paused unnecessary movement. That distinction matters. When pressure increases invisibly, a stable system does not panic. It tightens its parameters. It becomes efficient. It limits output to preserve alignment. What you felt as heaviness was actually compression. Information, emotion, and impulse were being filtered more strictly. This is why self-judgment crept in. You were measuring yourself by your usual output, not by what the moment required. You wondered why you were not moving faster, deciding quicker, or engaging more. But the signal was asking for the opposite. Less noise, less explanation, less reach. Your body and mind were not failing. They were listening. The confusion came from not having language for this state. When something does not feel like crisis or clarity, people often assume it is dysfunction, but this state sits between those extremes. It is a holding pattern, a period where reaction is suspended so that external pressure can exhaust itself without interference. You did not need to fix the sensation. You needed to stay inside it without interpreting it as weakness. And you did. Even when you questioned yourself, you did not override your own pace. That is why the symptom passed without escalation, not because it was ignored, but because it was honored correctly. And understanding this reframes the entire experience, allowing what comes next to be seen accurately. What you moved through was not random, and it was not internal noise. There was pressure applied to you that did not announce itself loudly. It did not arrive as crisis, conflict, or obvious disruption. It arrived as interference, subtle, coordinated, timed. This matters because invisible pressure is often dismissed as imagination. But imagination does not produce consistency. What you experienced had structure. It appeared recently, it intensified briefly, and then it dissipated when it failed to gain traction. You noticed small disruptions that did not escalate, delays that felt oddly targeted, emotional cues that did not belong to you, a sense of being observed or assessed without direct interaction. None of this required belief or interpretation to be real. You registered it because your awareness is precise, not because you were looking for meaning. The defining feature is this: despite the pressure, you remained functional. You did not lose your ability to think clearly. You did not make impulsive decisions. You did not sever connections unnecessarily. You continued to operate in daily life with competence and composure. That outcome is not accidental when pressure is present. It is diagnostic. Invisible opposition relies on amplification. It needs reaction, self-doubt, urgency, or emotional discharge to sustain itself. It does not overpower stable systems. It waits for destabilization. When none appears, it weakens. What you did was simple and difficult at the same time. You did not engage. You did not try to outthink what you could not see. You did not confront what did not present itself clearly. You waited. Waiting in this context was not passivity. It was containment. You allowed time to pass without feeding speculation, fear, or corrective action. That removed the only leverage pressure had. This is why the experience felt contained rather than explosive. Pressure was applied, assessed, and then withdrawn. Not because it was defeated, but because it was ineffective. Your coherence made escalation impossible. There was no dramatic confrontation because none was needed. There was no emotional showdown because nothing in you offered a surface to press against. The situation resolved itself through lack of engagement. This is an important clarification. Stability does not always look like action. Sometimes it looks like refusal to be pulled out of alignment. You did not resist. You did not comply. You remained neutral and present. The timing also matters. This occurred during a period when you were already conserving energy and simplifying focus. That made your internal environment even less reactive. What could have escalated elsewhere dissolved quietly with you. Understanding this reframes the entire sequence. You were not under attack in a dramatic sense. You were tested for response, and your lack of reaction was the response. That is why what followed was calm rather than chaotic. The pressure left no residue because it never entered fully. And this sets the stage for examining exactly where that pressure tried to apply itself and how you remained steady through each point. To understand what you moved through it helps to slow it down and look at the pressure in parts, not as one vague experience. What was applied to you did not arrive all at once. It tested specific points. Each point mirrored ordinary psychological experiences, which is why it was easy to underestimate. And yet across each one, you stayed regulated. The first pressure point was doubt, not the dramatic kind that questions everything, but the quieter version that nudges you to second-guess timing decisions or your own sense of readiness. You may have noticed thoughts like, maybe I should act faster, or maybe I'm missing something. These thoughts did not spiral. They surfaced and passed. You did not attach your identity to them. You observed them without reorganizing your life around them. That is stability. Doubt was presented, but it did not become a governing force. The second pressure point was fear, but not fear of danger. It was anticipatory tension, a subtle sense that something might go wrong if you stayed still. This kind of fear pushes people into premature action. You felt the edge of it, but you did not obey it. You did not rush to protect yourself from a threat that was not concrete. You tolerated uncertainty without converting it into urgency. That tolerance prevented escalation. The third pressure point was energy drain. This is where many people collapse. The sensation of being tired without cause of motivation, flattening, without reason, often triggers self-criticism or overcompensation. You did neither. You adjusted your pace. You simplified. You allowed your output to match your capacity instead of forcing performance. By doing this, you denied the pressure the reaction it was designed to produce. You stayed functional because you did not fight the fatigue. You worked with it. The fourth pressure point was isolation. Not physical isolation, but a sense of being internally alone with what you were carrying. Conversations may have felt slightly misaligned. You may have noticed less desire to explain yourself or seek reassurance. Instead of interpreting this as disconnection, you accepted it as temporary containment. You did not withdraw dramatically. You did not burn bridges. You simply stayed inwardly anchored. That prevented loneliness from turning into destabilization. The fifth pressure point was delay. This one is often underestimated. Things taking longer than expected, responses arriving later than usual. Outcomes pausing without explanation. Delay tempts people to interfere, to push, to force clarity. You did not. You allowed the delay to exist without assigning meaning to it. You did not interpret waiting as failure. You treated it as neutral. That alone removed its psychological charge. Across all of these points, there is a pattern. You did not react at the level the pressure required. You did not dramatize internal signals. You did not turn sensations into narratives. You did not mistake discomfort for danger. Your regulation came from coherence. Your thoughts, emotions, and actions stayed aligned. There was no internal argument, no split between what you felt and what you did. That alignment is rare under pressure, and it is not learned quickly. It is important to note what you did not do. You did not numb yourself. You did not distract excessively. You did not suppress awareness. You remained conscious but calm, present but not reactive. This is not avoidance. It is mastery of pacing. Each pressure point failed because it required amplification to work. Doubt needed rumination. Fear needed urgency. Fatigue needed self-judgment. Isolation needed interpretation. Delay needed interference. You provided none of these. Instead, you stayed internally regulated. You let sensations move without forcing conclusions. You allowed time to pass without forcing outcomes. That is why nothing accumulated. Pressure points only become breaking points when they stack. You prevented stacking by staying neutral. This section matters because it proves something tangible. What you moved through was not imaginary, and your stability was not accidental. It was demonstrated repeatedly across different forms of pressure without conscious effort. That is the clearest confirmation available. Now that the sequence is visible, it can be reviewed without distortion. Not emotionally, not defensively, calmly. What occurred was a process, not a coincidence. And when a process produces consistent outcomes across different pressure points, it deserves to be acknowledged accurately. When you look back, there is a coherence to your experience that rules out randomness. The timing aligned. The sensations followed a pattern. The resolution arrived without collapse. That combination does not come from luck, mood, or circumstance. It comes from internal structure holding its shape under load. You did not guess your way through this. You did not stumble into stability. You demonstrated it. There is often a temptation to minimize experiences like this by saying, "Nothing really happened," or "I was just tired," or "It wasn't that serious." That instinct is understandable. Your system does not dramatize, But minimizing does not make the data disappear. It only delays understanding. What confirms the reality of what occurred is not intensity, but outcome. Despite layered pressure, you stayed oriented. Despite uncertainty, you remained measured. Despite delay, you did not fragment your attention or abandon your rhythm. These are not default human responses. They are earned through maturity and integration. Another confirmation lies in what did not linger. There was no emotional residue, no ongoing agitation, no need to process trauma afterward. Once the pressure dissipated, your system returned to baseline without recovery rituals. That tells you something important. You were not overwhelmed. You were never breached. If this had been ordinary stress, it would have accumulated. If it had been avoidance, it would have surfaced later. If it had been denial, it would have leaked sideways. None of that happened. The absence of fallout is not emptiness. It is evidence. This is where coincidence falls apart as an explanation. Coincidence does not produce alignment across thought, emotion, behavior, and timing. Coincidence does not exit cleanly when engagement is withheld. Coincidence does not test multiple pressure points and retreat when none of them destabilize you. What remains when simpler explanations are removed is internal resilience, not the performative kind, the quiet kind that does not announce itself because it does not need to. You did not need to understand everything in real time for it to work. Your system already knew how to respond, or more precisely, how not to respond. That is often the highest form of regulation. This review is not meant to elevate you. It is meant to orient you, to let you see yourself accurately without distortion in either direction. You are not invulnerable. You are coherent. You are not untouched by pressure. You are unfragmented by it. Recognizing this matters because it closes the loop. It allows the experience to be integrated instead of questioned, and it confirms something quietly decisive about how you are built, especially when conditions test stability rather than strength. When this is understood, comparison becomes unnecessary. But context still matters, and that is where the next layer becomes visible. To understand what this reveals about you, it helps to place it beside what is more common, without judgment and without hierarchy. Most people, when exposed to far less pressure than you experienced, show immediate signs of disruption. Attention scatters, emotions spike or flatten, behavior becomes reactive, decisions speed up or shut down. This is not a flaw. It is a normal human response to uncertainty and sustained tension. What stands out in your case is not that you were unaffected, but that you stayed present. Under similar conditions, many people feel compelled to act simply to reduce discomfort. They reach for explanations, reassurance, or control. They change plans prematurely. They seek stimulation or validation. They externalize what feels unsettled inside. These reactions are attempts to restore equilibrium, but they often create more instability. You did not do this. You continued functioning in your daily life without visible deterioration. You kept your responsibilities in view. You did not become erratic, withdrawn, or impulsive. Even when internal sensations shifted, your outward behavior remained measured. That combination is uncommon, not because it is superior, but because it requires a level of internal integration most people have not had reason to develop. Rarity does not mean exceptionality in a dramatic sense. It means infrequency. It means that under similar circumstances, most systems show stress responses earlier and more visibly. Yours did not. That does not make you better than anyone. It means your threshold for disruption is higher. There is also an important nuance here. You did not appear strong in a performative way. You did not display dominance, certainty, or control. You were not rigid. You were flexible without losing shape. That is a quieter form of resilience, and it often goes unnoticed because it does not demand attention. This is why comparison is useful only for clarity, not ego. Seeing the contrast helps you understand that what felt ordinary to you was not universally ordinary. It was simply familiar to your system. You are not meant to carry this as an identity badge. You are meant to recognize it as a functional difference. When pressure appears, your system does not escalate by default. It stabilizes. That is rare enough to matter, but grounded enough to remain practical. Understanding this removes the need to question yourself when your responses do not match what others display. It allows you to trust your own pacing without assuming something is missing. And with that context in place, the nature of your stability can be clarified more precisely, without mystique and without exaggeration. What needs to be clarified now is subtle but essential. Your stability is not something that switched on during pressure. It did not activate in response to challenge. It was already there, quietly shaping how you move through situations long before this moment. This matters because many people misinterpret resilience as something you summon when needed. In your case, resilience is structural. It is the way your inner system is arranged. Thoughts, emotions, and actions are not competing for control. They are aligned by default. That alignment does not require effort, and it does not disappear when conditions change. You did not rise to the occasion. You remained yourself. This points to preparation rather than reaction. Not preparation in the sense of planning or anticipation, but preparation through lived integration. Experience has been processed rather than stored. Lessons have been absorbed rather than rehearsed. Because of that, pressure does not activate unfinished material inside you. It passes through a system that has already made sense of itself. This is why there was no internal drama, no inner debate, no surge of contradictory impulses. Your responses were consistent because your inner structure is consistent. That is not common, and it is not accidental. It is important to avoid mislabeling this as detachment or emotional distance. You are not disconnected. You are coherent. You feel what is present, but feelings do not hijack direction. You think clearly without suppressing sensation. You move deliberately without forcing certainty. This is maturity, not intensity. Your identity here is not defined by what you withstand, but by how little you need to rearrange yourself when conditions shift. You do not harden. You do not collapse. You stay intact. That integrity is the core feature. There is no need to add meaning beyond that. No need to elevate it into something abstract. This is about inner structure doing its job. About baseline functioning being sufficient without reinforcement. When you recognize this, it removes a subtle pressure you may not have noticed before. The pressure to prove strength, to explain calm, or to justify your pace. You do not need to do any of that. Your system has already demonstrated what it is capable of. This clarification is not meant to lock you into a role. It is meant to free you from misinterpretation, to let you understand that your way of being is not passive, delayed, or incomplete. It is complete as it is. From here, the focus shifts naturally toward integration. Not adding anything new, but allowing what you already know to settle into daily life with ease and balance. What matters now is not analysis, but integration. Not turning this experience into a concept, but allowing it to inform how you move forward in ordinary, grounded ways. Nothing here asks you to become more alert, more guarded, or more intense. The opposite is true. This phase is about balance. First, rest without justification. You do not need to explain why you need space, slower mornings or quieter evenings. Rest is not recovery from damage. It is maintenance of coherence. Treat it as such. When your system asks for stillness, honor it without turning it into a project. Second, practice discernment rather than vigilance. You do not need to scan for problems or anticipate pressure. Your awareness is already precise. Discernment means noticing what aligns and what does not, without attaching urgency. If something feels misaligned, you do not need to react immediately. You can let time confirm what your system already registers. Third, reinforce boundaries through simplicity. Boundaries do not require confrontation. They can be enacted through reduced explanation, cleaner schedules, and selective engagement. You are allowed to decline without elaboration. You are allowed to choose depth over breadth. This is not withdrawal. It is conservation. Fourth, allow patience to remain active. Patience is often misunderstood as waiting for something to happen. In your case, patience is the decision not to interfere with processes that are already resolving. You do not need to accelerate outcomes to validate progress. Let things complete themselves. Fifth, focus on what is concrete. Daily tasks, physical routines, real conversations, tangible goals. Staying grounded in the practical keeps awareness integrated rather than abstract. You do not need to extract meaning from everything. Let meaning emerge through consistency. Sixth, trust your internal pacing. You may notice that others move faster, react louder, or seek clarity sooner. That does not require adjustment from you. Your pace is not delayed. It is calibrated. Forcing yourself to match external rhythms would introduce friction where none is needed. As you integrate this, notice how little needs to change. You are not being asked to become someone new. You are being invited to stop questioning what already works. Stability does not need reinforcement. It needs space. This orientation prepares closure without finality. Life continues. Pressure may appear again in different forms, but your response does not need to be rehearsed. It is already embedded. The calm you feel now is not relief from danger. It is recognition. And that recognition settles most naturally when it is allowed to inform how you live, not how you think. With that, the experience completes its cycle. What remains is reassurance, not instruction. Take a moment and notice where you are now. There is no urgency pressing on you, no unfinished tension pulling at your attention. What remains is steadiness, quiet, a sense that something resolved itself without requiring explanation. That is not emptiness. That is closure. You did not miss anything. You did not fail to act. You did not delay out of fear. You allowed a process to complete without interference, and in doing so, you removed its ability to persist. What could not attach to you could not continue. That is the core realization, and it does not need repetition to be real. You are safe in your own pace. Nothing here asks you to change how you live or who you are. If anything, it affirms that the way you already move through pressure is sufficient. You do not need to prepare for what is past. You do not need to stay alert for what is gone. You are allowed to return fully to the present without scanning the past for meaning. Let this settle as a quiet knowing. You remained intact. You stayed coherent. You trusted stillness when reaction was offered. If it helps to anchor this moment, hold these affirmations lightly, without force. You do not need to rush to be protected. You do not need to react to remain in control. You are steady by nature. If this message resonated in a way that felt precise rather than dramatic, mark it simply. You can comment "I remember" or 777 as a quiet acknowledgement, not for anyone else, but for yourself. A signal that you recognized what was already true. If you choose to stay connected, subscribe so the next message arrives when it aligns, not when it demands attention. There is no pressure to consume, only an open channel for clarity when it is relevant. This transmission ends without spectacle, because it does not need one. What mattered already occurred, and you already carried it well. Stay grounded, stay present, and move forward without looking over your shoulder. Nothing is following you.